to Healing the Brokenhearted. We're so happy to have you with us. We are happy to continue our class. I know I have been gone for a few weeks now. It's been, I think, 87 days, or 80, what's today, the 6th of May? So 86 days since I have been self-quarantined. And that kind of started right when you guys saw me last. Was kind of the last time I was out and about in public before Harden was born. So he's here, he's happy, healthy, and that's what we're trying to do, is stay happy and healthy. So we are self-quarantined, we're socially isolating it's been a long time, but we're making it. So that's a very interesting dynamic to have with this class, because there are definitely some ways that we have all been experiencing grief, that we know our definition of grief well enough to recognize that, all right, I'm grieving some things about being in quarantine, but also Brenda's grieving some things. They could be the same things, could be different things, but we're going to process them differently. We're going to experience them in unique ways, even if it's the same situation. So I think that this class came at a really good time for us to learn on a deeper level about some of the things that we experience with grief. And that I know has helped me be more prepared for this time with the quarantine. So Ray, before we get started with the review, is there anything you want to jump in and say? We also should pray. I can open us up in prayer.
It's good. Yeah, I was going to suggest we open in prayer, so go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. Dear Lord, thank you so much for mediums like Zoom, for evenings like tonight, where despite what we have going on in our homes or in our lives right now, that we are able to come together and learn more about our emotions, learn more about creation and your promises and your hopes for us. We thank you for being here with us. Despite being in separate places, we are so thankful that we have your love and we have your presence with us. I pray over our discussion that it is meaningful and that we learn about your heart for us, Lord. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. So guys, we've been talking for just about 9 weeks prior to this class. This is the 10th week. And so we thought tonight we would just start with a quick review. And before we get into the lesson for tonight, and the lesson for tonight is actually on anger. I'm so angry I could. And in a few minutes, I'm going to come back to all of you. I'm going to ask you, you could do what? I think that's really, really important. But by way of review here, Jessica, there we go. We talked about the real motivation of this class was to really kind of help people move from tragedy to triumph. And as we now have kind of entered into the Wuhan, the COVID, the whatever we're calling it today, it really is very timely for us to have studied and prepared our hearts in a very personal, intimate way for the whole concept of tragedy and triumph. And so, the goal here is to move us to a place of life again, a place of joy, a place of peace. And, in the last 9 weeks, we have kind of been journeying through that by looking at these kind of big themes that we have pulled out of the curriculum that we're looking out of. So if you're watching with us here on YouTube, we also have made this available to you. The book that we're using, it's a free download for you there. We have it in what kind of file is it, Jess? It's just a
PDF.
Yeah, so PDF, where you can look at it and you can study along with us. But then on that second week, we started to develop a definition, because if you think about grief, and I think if you remember our class, we went around and people said, well, we asked you to give us one word, right? And everybody had a different word, which reminds us that getting an understanding of grief is like holding on to Jell-O. It's like, being at the sand and trying to count the number of grains in the sand, or holding it tightly in your fist. It just slips away. And grief is kind of like that. So we came up with our definition, and a definition that really doesn't reject stage theory, of grief, if you know anything about it, but really kind of adds to it. It really complements it, and it looks at it more rather than a linear process, more that something that I'm going to visit and maybe I'm going to come back to, and maybe it's going to rotate around again. And so we came up with this definition that grief is the normal process of natural emotions and feelings which are uniquely experienced after any loss of any relationship. And so we want to normalize what people are feeling. And even now in the nation, the world, we want to normalize that. We don't want people to feel like, well, what you're feeling, is not normal. It's abnormal. Be quiet. Don't talk about that. Something must be wrong with you. That's how we have catastrophic events. That's how people get kind of lost in addiction. That's how people kind of get lost permanently through suicide and death. And when we take away people's just, hey, this is a very normal process. It's going to occur if you lived any period of time on the earth. You're going to experience grief, and it's normal. And so to a person who may be type A, or always on game, always on point, always very much in control of everything, going through grief can be hard, and understanding that this thing is going to time you out. Have any of you been timed out since COVID started? Have any of your plans been disrupted a little bit since we've gone through this 8-week season now, going into the 9th week? It's also natural. We believe that God's created us to grieve as much as surge protectors protect electrical appliances from energy, too much energy. The system shuts down naturally, and the brain shuts down. Our whole processing shuts down. And it's important that we allow that, and that's okay. We're all kind of been put into a little shutdown period right now. And for some of it, it's like, wow, thank you. This is amazing. I don't know if I'll ever go back to for others of us, man, we're chomping at the bit. And some of us, we worked right through it. So, we really haven't gone to shutdown. I keep saying to my wife, I wonder when the crash will come, when I just will have to stop and not be able to give anymore right now. It's emotions and feelings. It's this natural process. It's like a roller coaster. I can be feeling one thing in one moment, one thing in the next, and within a minute I can go from laughing and remembering a fond memory to just deeply in crying and in sorrow. It's unique to each relationship, and that means we can't take people's grief away. And by no means has our last 9 weeks together been an effort to take away anyone's grief or sweep their grief under the carpet. And it's unique based on the loss and the relationship, and that's what makes it unique. Even in the case where you say, well, I lost a child, you lost a child, I know exactly how you feel. We don't ever want to be those people that are telling other people we know just how they feel in the midst of their grief right now. Night 3, our third big concept was truth versus feelings. And, we have been taught in our faith to not necessarily respond to tragedy with our feelings, or really any big decision based on that way. Our feelings can lie to us, they can trap us, they can mix us up. And, it's very, very important that we understand that we want to start with truth. And that has even been, again, we see with the virus, a quest for the truth. The tricky thing about this virus is we don't often know all the truth about it, right? Like what is the truth? And where will we get the truth? And who do we go to the truth for? And so finding the truth sometimes can be difficult, but we're also talking about eternal truth. We're talking about the God of the universe that would never leave us nor forsake us. The God of the universe who holds us in the palm of his hand. The God of the universe who says he loves us and we can't be separated from his love. These are eternal truths that no virus can interrupt, no divorce, no separation. We can't even be separated from the love of God in death. And that's a beautiful thing. So in the midst of this, we want to be mindful of I feel statements. I feel this, I feel that. And then walking in that, and then believing that, and then declaring, oh, well, that must be true. We all have experienced that and came up with the wrong answer. And just kind of invert that. and look at God's process. Start with the truth. You know the truth, and it'll set you free. You got to believe it, though, because you can't walk in something you don't believe. It's very difficult. You can be dragged to walk in something you don't believe, but you drag kicking and fighting. To really, really walk in it, freely walk in it, you have to believe it. And after you believe it, you have to walk in it. You have to exercise your belief. You have to step out. And a lot of us right now, we have some truth about the virus. We are believing some things about the virus, and we are exercising that belief through walking with face masks, through walking with gloves, through walking 6 feet apart from people, walking to the restroom or to the washroom to wash our hands after contacts. And, when we do those things, we find some feeling, don't we? We have some peace, we have some joy, we have a sense of release. For some, it's quarantine. It's totally staying away from everybody. We have people that haven't been out of their house in 80 days. Not just, I'm going to protect myself, but haven't left the house. Have the groceries delivered to the house. Wipe off the groceries before they come into the house. Throw away the garments that they used to wipe off the groceries that came into the house. And they're walking out what they believe and they feel is true. And they're coming then, they say, well, at least I have some peace. In the fourth night, we went to defining the great adventure. And, I think it's very, very important. I think we talked about this to some extreme. And I love the way over these last 7 weeks, 6 weeks, you guys have been using this word. We have a new adventure. I have a new adventure. Because we know a few things, that life starts with a series of chores or duties or responsibilities. And we've just chosen to use a really upbeat, positive word, that life is all about adventures. We have marriage adventures. We have parenting adventures. We have work adventures. We have social adventures. We have parenting individual children adventures. And we can create boxes for all of those. And they must be defined, because left undefined, others will define them for us. And so that's really an important principle for us as we look at this idea of the adventure. And with the adventure, we have to understand that it helps us then to then define the adventure. And from defining it, we must then allocate the resources versus resourcing our feelings. We looked at that big chart, remember, and you had 3 columns, and you had the adventure on the left, and in the middle you had resources, and in the right you had your feelings. And our feelings should follow well-defined adventures. And we can always take our emotional pulse by asking ourselves, what am I feeling? And the next question should be, what is my adventure? Okay, not what resources do I need to feel better. That's just resourcing your feelings. But asking myself, what am I trying to do right now? What's my adventure? What's my adventure in my marriage? What's my adventure in my personal work life? What's my adventure in my parenting? And that becomes very important as we go through the journey of grief. At week 5, we talked about this whole idea of the adventure. The most important part, as we're grieving loss, is to define the adventure box of our new identity. Who am I now? And what is the truth about God's perspective about who I am? Because who I am after a really nasty divorce can really leave me with a really poor identity of myself. I can start to believe a lot of things about myself that are not true. And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes as we talk about the stories, right, between the now and the next. But so our identity really comes under question when we're dealing with loss. Any loss, termination of a job. What was it? What did I do wrong? Again, in divorce, death. They died. They're gone. God, man, you left me. You forsake me. You said you wouldn't do these things. So, identity and God's perspective of our identity becomes really important. And it's really important here to know that just like breath, God has given us some basic DNA. He's wired us for environments of acceptance. We don't do well in environments of rejection. It's because we weren't created to work in those environments, no more than we were created to walk on our hands, right, or stop breathing. We don't work in environments of rejection. We thrive in environments of acceptance. We also thrive in environments of security. And that's not toys, that's not possessions. That's stability and consistency. Children do so much better when we have boundaries. Could you think about relationships without boundaries, marriage without boundaries? Not much of a marriage. Not because, well, boundaries, because there's no security. People don't feel safe. And we thrive when we understand why we're on the earth. What's our passion? Why did God make us? Why are we here? Some will even chase the rocks to find out. Some will listen to the stars. And, again, through our faith, because we are people of faith, we have chosen to believe what God says about us, that he's wired us to accept us unconditionally. He's wired us that we're safe with him, and that he's wired us for a purpose. He's got a plan for our lives. In week 6, we talked about our emotions, and we came up with this whole concept that just like our physical lives have a spiritual purpose. Think about your hands, right? To serve others, to worship God. Think about your eyes to behold the goodness of God, to how with our eyes we can show love and we can show tenderness and grace to people. Think about our mouth as we can praise God, but we can also speak words of life and not death, and words of encouragement and hope and peace to people. Our bodies have a physical purpose. These flesh suits wrap up our spirit man, which just longs to communicate. And just like our body has a spiritual purpose and our spirit has a spiritual purpose, we have said our emotions were given to us by God for a spiritual purpose. And we looked at that, and then we began to look at individual emotions. And it's really, really important that we understand that. So the biblical purpose, what is God's purpose that we experience fear? Well, it teaches us to revere or to respect or to honor that which we know nothing about, kind of like electricity. What is the purpose of guilt? Oh, there should be no guilt. Guilt is terrible. Shame is wrong. God never shamed anyone. But guilt is an honest emotion that says, I'm sorry that I've done something wrong. I'm sorry that I hurt you. I'm sorry I betrayed you. I'm sorry I walked away when I should have stayed. If we didn't have guilt, we'd have no reason. We'd have no longing to be in healthy relationships with God or with one another, for we were created for relationships. We explore the emotion of what? Pain. Wow. I mean, Tylenol says 10 minutes, going to be gone. Put holes in the tablet, right? So we really explored that emotion. We said, there's a spiritual purpose to pain. There's a biblical purpose to it. And then in the crucible of pain, godly character is born. And then we looked at that emotion of loneliness, which so many people right now are experiencing. And as we've surveyed people and we work with people on a daily basis as essential workers through the virus right now, people's loneliness has never been at a higher place. I haven't seen the stats directly, but I've seen the ads increase for dating sites, connecting. We thought we were so connected, didn't we? We went into this whole crisis thinking we're probably the most connected people at any time in the history of the world. And yet, in the midst of this, we're finding out that loneliness is just like a warm blanket that's been wrapped around us. And we realize that loneliness drives us back into a relationship. If you didn't experience the loneliness when your spouse is away, then you probably aren't in a very significant relationship with that person. Loneliness reminds us that we long for them. Loneliness reminds us that we need a God. We need something bigger than us, or as AA would say, our higher power. Moving through here, and Jessica, thank you so much for this review. We wrapped up with that, and then we come to tonight. Along the way, we did talk about one more big item, and I just want to touch on it for just a second. And that was the concept of between the now and the next when it comes to our loss. Remember the now and the next, right? The importance of us, we kind of always say, well, what's next? Have you asked what's next in the last few weeks? Have you maybe you didn't say it out loud, but I'm sure you wondered. I know I was not prepared last week to read the headline of USA Today and say the food chain is being disrupted. I was not prepared for that next. And in that now, I contacted a farmer and said, do you think you might be able to get me a cow? Okay. Because I was just unprepared for that next. We talked about that when we have that position of being in a now that's uncomfortable, we tend to do a few things. We tend to want to run to the familiar, which is often dangerous. Okay. The familiar can be that thing which has put us in bondage. Think about the children of Israel, right? They were in bondage 430 years. Pharaoh lets them go. He changes his heart. He changes his mind after these plagues come, right? They get out. They're on their way out. They could turn left, run into the arms of another army. They could go straight and get caught by Pharaoh pretty easy. God sends them in the middle of the night in a storm to the Red Sea. And there at the Red Sea, they find themselves being very sarcastic. Well, Moses, couldn't we have just have died in Egypt? Wasn't there enough graves there? Surely they knew there were more than enough graves in Egypt that could have buried them. But they're very sarcastic. They wanted the familiar. Even after God sends them across the Red Sea and parts the sea, they do that over and over again. They want to go back to the familiar. The familiar was 430 years of slavery, 10 generations of their culture and their people. And yet that's what they were running to. And we're no different than they were. We want to run back to our familiar food. We want to run back to our familiar person that's always going to kind of tell us what we want to hear. Maybe not so much what we need to hear. We want to sometimes run to things that aren't so healthy for us. Maybe that bottle or that pill. We tend to run to the familiar when we're faced with the now that is not necessarily something that we want to be in. But the other part of that we discussed is that the idea that it leaves headspace for us to start, as we want the next, we start to listen for the stories that are going to get us there. What story? What's going to get me to the next? What's going to get me to the next? And we want the short story, right? We want hey, I want the short. I want the Cliff Notes version. That'll get me to the next. We learn that can be dangerous, right? We can learn that the secondhand story can be dangerous. We learn that secondhand information. So we learn to be really mindful that when we're in the now, that the most important thing of being in the now is acknowledging the now. I hear people say, again, as we're out ministering to people every day through this and online, I hear people say all the time, like, I'm starting to accept the fact that, I just need to just stay put. I just need to just accept what is today and stop keep worrying about tomorrow or next week or next month. And that's a great lesson in our grief. That's a great lesson in our sorrow. We don't often know the next. And because we don't, we have to just be comfortable and sit in the now. Remember, your next will always then be your now. Okay? So it's okay to sit in the now. It's kind of a good, healthy place to be. Tonight, any questions about the review? Any comments about the review? Tell me some of your thoughts.
I think it was helpful because it's been a while.
Oh, yes, it has.
It was very helpful.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of territory.
We sure did.
Yeah, a lot of good principles.
Yeah.
You can see those principles can relate to a lot of different areas of our life as well. Yeah. Michelle, what spoke to you in that overview?
I'm kind of still going through a few things of my own with my uncle passing. So I'm not so angry. I'm still kind of grieving, but I'm a little bit more relieved.
Yeah.
So I'm going through a little toss up still.
Yeah. Jen, what was one of those principles that helped you? Really stuck out?
I think now I'm getting fidgety about where we are. So I'm having a little trouble sitting in the now. I'm really wanting to move forward, and so I was doing good, but now I'm tired of it.
Yeah. I can honestly say again, I'm experienced this. This thing morphs, right? And that's
Yeah.
why going back to your adventure is so key.
Yeah.
Right? Defining a well-defined adventure, not just a physical adventure with the virus, but an emotional adventure with the virus. Okay? Just really, really being in that place. Like, where am I? Where do I want to be here? What's going on? You know, what's the bigger thing that's going on here? And defining that. And it can be hard to do. It can be a challenge to do. Jess, do you want to add anything to the review? You were co-teacher there for a long time.
You know, what's interesting is this class is so long, and the interesting part I'm realizing about that is how we may have started this class thinking of one circumstance in life that we were experiencing grief over, and now there may have been more family members who passed away. There's this virus we're dealing with. There's loneliness from isolation. There's anger from being stuck in the same house with people, maybe. Our emotions are they're complex, and they're more compounded now. So yeah, with our class having started in January of 2020, now we're in May, and we had a little delay there because of the virus, but now we're back together, and it's unique to see how life has continued moving on, and how our skills that we've been learning about and these big ideas that Ray has been teaching us have helped us prepare us for this, I think. So today we're going to talk about, oh, sorry, Martha, go ahead.
I was going to say that our emotions are raw, aren't they? They're just,
yeah.
I feel like we're just naked with our emotions right now. It's just, yeah, feeling that. Yeah. Go ahead, Jessica.
I was just going to mention that the idea of the venture, you're absolutely right, Ray and Jessica. Defining that, what is happening or what I see as an adventure rather than something negative has had a big impact, because of reframing that to as something hopeful rather than something.
Thank you, Martha.
Definitely.
Good feedback for us.
But I know as you were doing the review and we were talking about identity and down to the point of purpose, I think that's a definite change for me. I feel like at one point, the purposes that I set out, or that I was in, my purpose, things that I'm committed to, very, very clear. And with the quiet, a lot of things have kind of stepped back. And it's like, who are we now that we're not doing some of the things that we attached our purpose to? So like Jan said, fidgety, looking for new purpose. And I feel like with my renovation, I've still got things I'm still engaged in. So it's not as big a question for me, but when I get to a point where I'm kind of done, I might be looking for that, because that's important to me, how I serve and how I engage with others and caring for others. You know, we had an earlier Zoom meeting with the Stephen leaders today, and we talked about that. Martha was on that call too. So it gets more challenging. It gets not so easy or not so obvious. This is impacting us from a lot of different standpoints.
Cool. That's good. Good feedback. Thank you so much. So let's go back to the question for tonight. Tonight, we're going to look at the emotion of anger. And in anger, we asked this question to start. I'm so angry I could. And what would you fill in the blank with? Just how you feel in the last over the last few weeks. Well, how would you fill it in? I could what? We can have fun. We can laugh. I'm so angry I could. Martha, go ahead. Yes, we lost the audio.
Okay. I'm so angry I could change a behavior. because I have to have some motivation to change a behavior. I don't,
Oh.
I'll just shrug and do something else.
Good. Good. I like that. I would not have, I wouldn't have got that one right on the exam.
Oh.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you, wise and gracious one. Yeah. Martha's a retired therapist, folks, so we lean into Martha when we want words of wisdom.
No.
So go ahead. Anyone else want to take a, I'm so angry I could. You guys are all scared.
Because I'm by myself so much and there's no one to talk to me other than God. We have our own conversation. But I start talking out loud like this, and why is it this way, or why did this person, I cannot understand that at all. And it's more of a frustration than it is anger. But I am just carrying on. There's no one there. But it's not a yelling. It's none of that. It's just, I am just out there with it,
I
If
think
the
you
walls
just,
could talk.
yeah. I think, yeah, a lot of us are so angry we could just rant for hours.
Yeah, ranting. Maybe that is a rant. It
Mhm.
might be a rant.
Yeah. Anyone else? I'm so angry I could. I know for my wife, you've seen her kind of walking around our house here a little bit, and she's not the masked woman, but my wife has not stopped cleaning the house. She's so angry she could clean everyone's house right now, because that's how she's processing the frustration and the anger that she's feeling from her employment situation and 30 million people's employment situation. We're not alone in that, but yeah, she's, it's interesting. I'm more of a ranter, but I have found that I am so angry that I could, let's see if I can do it. If you can see it over there on the floor, I probably can't. Rebuild 1,000, 10,000 Lego pieces.
Wow.
And when I get so angry that I just don't want to rant, don't want to yell, I just sit. I think I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning last night.
Oh my
Putting
goodness.
together Legos through this situation. And we have gone through our 8-year-old's room, and we have taken every Lego that we've ever purchased for him and that has been destroyed or broken or whatever. We have ripped them all down to separate all the pieces out, got all the books out, and I think we just have finished our 55th Lego project. And today's project was a huge rocket and about 600 pieces. And so I'm so angry I could just build a 10,000 piece Lego set. But on a more
Michelle, did
serious,
you have something you were going to add?
I was just gonna say scream, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, the usual coping skills of, all right, let's just leave the house, let's go run an errand, let's go hang out with a friend, let's go and have dinner somewhere where I don't have to cook, doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
Those things have not been a reality. So yeah, the anger has, I guess we could say it's looked different these days, right?
yeah, and we have to remember that, anger has subsets. As clinical therapists, we know the subsets: mad, upset, right? This is beyond frustration now, that's its own emotion, but mad, upset, and then what? We have rage, right? We see people sometimes, some places in the country right now, right? But there's a huge amount of rage, and there's then blackout. People hurting, doing things to other people, and they've never done that, would have never behaved that way. Something comes out of a spouse's mouth that they would have never, ever been that way, or a child's mouth even, because the children are going through this as much as we adults are trying to process it. The children are totally impacted by this. And so, those are the subsets of anger. So, we've encompassed those as we're talking tonight. Let's talk about, just for a few minutes before we get to the big idea of anger, about sources of anger. On page 41 in the literature that we're looking at in our book, we see the sources of anger, and it's coming up on the screen as we speak. Good. So the first source of our anger is life isn't always fair. So injustice creates anger, doesn't it? Those things in life that just aren't fair. A second source of anger is, well, I've never been so humiliated. Humiliation brings out anger. The third one is, I just can't do this anymore. We just talked about frustration, right? A few weeks ago, I was sharing about how, part of my journey has been, just all of this pent up frustration. I started with the facts, and this isn't fair. And boy, it's so frustrated that we're still going through this. People are actually dying, and then now the food, and then everything else that's going on. And then there's people who just, this is the only way I know. Anger is infectious. Bad company corrupts good behavior. So it's important that we understand the source of the anger when we're dealing with it. And that helps us, because if we understand the source, that when we think about the adventure, right, go back to the adventure, if I understand the source, so often we'll say, well, this person made me so angry. And so we want to think, well, what adventure should I be having with this person? Is this a toxic relationship that I should not be with this person, around this person? Is this just a boundaryless relationship that I need better or more appropriate boundaries? Is this a person that's just confused about my intent or my motive that just needs to be educated? Is this just a person in pain? And people who hurt tend to hurt others. So it's really, really important, because then that would help us, like Martha said, the importance of what? Defining the adventure. If we understand, hey, I'm angry, what's the source of my anger? And again, we can't just say, well, I'm angry, that's just the way it's going to be. Even if you're the fourth one, it's the only way I know. Okay? Some of us have been conditioned to respond in anger. Because if we didn't respond in anger, which is often called survival, we probably would be hurt. We may not even be alive. So it's really, really important that people stop for just a second and understand where the source is really coming from. Why? Because often the source, how we respond, is not really at the source. It's to some innocent person. Anger is like a hand grenade that gets lobbed into relationships. The shrapnel goes everywhere. It doesn't discriminate between the innocent in the conversation and the guilty. And it just hits everybody. And so that's why it's really, really important that we understand the source. We go back to the adventure rather than just react to our feeling or try to resource our feeling of anger. Resourcing your feeling of anger can lead to a deadly consequence. I'm mad, so I'm going to take this gun and come up with a plan and go shoot up my school. Because after all, they hurt me. That's resourcing your anger in an inappropriate way. Let's go down just a minute there to the stages of anger. Anger, we start with this irritation. We talked about it. Indignation, make him stop. It's not fair. Wrath, he's going to pay. Rage, he got what he deserved. And fury, I don't know what happened. And again, it doesn't really matter how you do it, just to understand that, you can be at a different part of anger and still be angry. Well, I'm just mad. Well, you're still in the anger spectrum. Well, I'm just upset. You're still in the anger spectrum, right? So we have to then process this. The important thing about anger is that we have to understand that if it's given to us for a biblical purpose, that means that we have to separate out what we call righteous anger and unrighteous anger. We live in a world of tolerance, don't we? Have you ever heard people say, well, everybody you just didn't get along, be tolerant, and all these things, right? But would you agree that there are some things that are just fundamentally wrong? Can you name one? Martha?
Child abuse.
Child abuse, right?
Said that I was so angry by reading an article in the newspaper about a gentleman that abused a child, and I don't know whether the child survived or not. I and not seeing the follow-up. But I have not been that angry in a long time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, can anyone else name one? Janice, down at the bottom.
Dan. There you go.
Any kind of using a situation
She
people
went mute.
to figure
Sorry, using a situation.
to exploit others.
Mm-hmm.
We're going through, and people scamming people are making unfounded offers that have, their whole purpose is to benefit themselves rather than really offering a help.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
that's good. That's a really good one. Yeah. Some other examples? There's just some things in life that are just wrong.
So many. I mean, I was just, oh, you're on mute. I've heard a couple situations in the last week where protesters have attacked our peace officers who are trying to get people to social distance and so forth. And some of their actions, it's like, give me a break. And there was some police guy who actually shot, some protester that shot a policeman, came up to his car or something, and he had his family in his car and killed the policeman because he was in such a rage.
Yeah. Yeah. So so some things are just wrong. Yeah. Yeah.
It's really
Michelle, you had something, Michelle?
Well, I just saw something on the news the other day. Everything's horrible nowadays. I mean, just in general, but some guy hit an elderly lady over a crowbar over the lady over some pizza or something. I forget what pizza place, but it's like still everyone's just being mean,
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. I mean, everywhere you turn, it just doesn't matter, just.
Yeah, I think of another absolute, an absolute, one of the other absolutes is that domestic violence.
Yes.
I don't think there's anybody that, is on the tolerance bandwagon that would go, oh yeah, well, go ahead and beat my mom, beat my sister, or beat my brother. It's just, there's just some absolutes. So when we come to anger, it's important to understand that not all anger is wrong. There should be some things that as a people, as a culture, that make us upset, that cause us to say that's wrong. Now, that doesn't give us a right to go and shoot anybody or hurt anybody. That's not what we're advocating. But it's really important to understand that, we've kind of been told and keep being conditioned that all anger is wrong, all anger is wrong, all anger is wrong. All that does is put people into a box that they can't ever express their emotion about it or come up with an adventure about it because it's just wrong. It's just, I'm not supposed to feel angry about anything. Well, that's not healthy. That's not a healthy society. A healthy society says, hey, there are certain things that are just wrong, and we want to acknowledge that they're wrong, and we want to voice that they're wrong, and we want to change the law that they're wrong, or we want to protect the innocent that they're wrong, and we want to help people that they're wrong. And that's driven to us, not just because we're compassionate, but that's driven because we're angry about it. It moved us to, Martha, you said it moved you to change behavior. We want that behavior, domestic violence, to stop. And it starts with people being angry enough to call up and get the law changed, or give more money for domestic violence shelters, or have more resources for counseling to help people out of the battered syndrome, right? So all of these things, it's just important when we talk about anger. There's a righteous side to anger, and then there's the unhealthy side, or the non-righteous side. The wrong side to anger is really what it means, and that's what many of you were talking about with the police officer being shot. What could make you so angry that you would take a gun and kill an innocent guy in a car with his family? I mean, that's just bizarre. That's just so off the wall. That's the unhealthy rage and side of anger that we have to be careful about. So that's important for us to understand. You know, a lot of times we will take an offense for another person that's not even our offense, right? That's not necessarily righteous anger. That's not, you know, well, I'm mad at him because he said this about her, and why? You know, support her, support him, support whoever it is that you feel has been unjust, but why go take, I'm going to go over there and beat him up. I'm going to go over there and just tell him, you know, why, right? You're not solving anything with that type of anger. So it's really, really important here when we talk about anger to understand that righteous anger should lead us to behavior that says, hey, God, what should we be doing about that? Jessica, you're part of, is it the Genesis Project or Jericho, Project Jericho?
Into the Jordan.
Into the Jordan, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, they're a group of survivors of human trafficking. Speaking of injustice, my goodness, the things that these women have learned, that things that have happened to them that were not things that they asked for, and then the way that they have had to continue dealing with injustice moving forward. It's inspiring to see how they are managing their lives now, and how hopeful they are, and how they are continuously working at the difference between these two types of anger that we're talking about.
That's good, Jessica. And that's a good example of people following the strategies of anger that we laid out in the book here, page 42. We talked about, you know, so what can be our strategies for anger? How can we, beyond the point of processing a healthy adventure about the source of our anger, right? What are the strategies? And the strategies that we're going to share with you here are, you know, first of all, it's important that we think biblically, right? We ask, you know, we really do ask. We don't just buy into, well, injustice is part of the world. Suppose that was everybody's attitude. Well, you know, they're from Tibet, you know, so, you know, we'll go get these girls and we'll bring them across. And what? Think biblically. That's somebody's daughter. That's a child of God. That's somebody who's created by God. Think biblically. Okay. The second thing is we want to speak biblically. And to speak biblically means to be slow to speak. How many of your conflicts would be resolved if you just took a moment to be slow to speak? And what? Quick to listen. Remember, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth by design, right? Because we're supposed to listen twice as much as we speak. So when we talk about speaking biblically, we want to be very slow to speak, right? And we want to be we want to take our time and listen. And we want to even walk away. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just take a moment, take a minute, and then go and confess, Lord, this makes me really angry right now. Well, what am I supposed to do with it? Is it righteous anger that I should be acting on it, like Jessica steps in and does the pro bono work with the organization, you know, with these women? Or is it something like, well, it's not my offense, Lord, but I can pray about it, you know? Now, I'm not going to jump on the bus and go to where the police officer was shot and protest outside the guy's house who shot him and, you know, berate a whole family over that. No, I don't want to indict everybody else because somebody made the wrong activity. And then we can speak biblically by speaking words of encouragement. Because again, hurting people hurt people. So if you can just stop and take a moment and think, why is this person spewing all of this out on me right now? Are they afraid? Fear will drive people to do some amazing things we learned, didn't we? Right? Amazing things. You will bite the hand that feeds you when you're afraid. Right? Or you'll run, or you'll move a car. Right? You can do amazing things when fear takes over. But we want to be those people who speak words of life. In the book of Ephesians, the writer Paul says to the church at Ephesus, he says, what? Let the words that come out of your mouth only bring grace and hope to the ear of the hearer. And that's really, really important when we're talking about speaking biblically. So we want to think biblically, we want to speak biblically, and then we want to act, right? We want to act by being disciplined about our anger. Okay? Because anger is like what? Gas at a match. It's like, you've seen it happen, right? The accidental explosion where people, they don't realize even the fume is there. And anger is like that. It's the fume, and then the spark hits the fume, not even the actual gasoline, and you have an explosion. Anger is the fume that fills up our families sometimes. It fills up our workplaces sometimes. It's just fumes. It's hard to get your hands around it. So we have to then discipline ourselves to be mindful, right, about identifying anger signals. What's triggering me, right? If I'm around a person who's constantly putting me down, and when I'm put down, I'm prone to anger, then I have to recognize, well, that relationship is a trigger to me, right? So I have to identify, what are the anger signals? How do I know? What is it? Am I ranting more? Is that a sign of it? It sounds very innocent, Am I throwing things? Am I punching holes in walls? Where am I lobbing those hand grenades? And being mindful of, where is that shrapnel going? Memorizing scripture, and then praying for those you're angry with. Sometimes you can't do anything about the injustice of it, but you can pray about that man who shot the police officer, and you can pray for that police officer and his family. He was a security guard, but nonetheless, it was a human being. And so, yeah, I'm really going to pray. Our nation right now is on the cusp of anger and hope and helplessness. That's where we are emotionally right now. We're long past anxiety and fear. We're long past frustration. We're long past upset and mad. Even rational, normal people. I'm not talking about people that are, they have an anger problem. They're doing things that they're not proud of right now, and that we're not proud of. But we're right on this cusp. Right on this cusp. And so we can be those who act biblically by what? Praying for those that we're angry with, praying for injustices, And then God gives us a wonderful thing when we're angry with somebody and that we're in relationship with, and that's this idea of forgiveness. And we're going to come back to that next week. We're going to talk about biblical forgiveness. It's really, really an important concept. And it's not just saying, hey, what you did to me is fine, do it again. You're going to learn a lot of truths from God about the whole concept of forgiveness. So does that help us with our anger as we've explored it a little bit tonight?
I think also in the context of our perspective, when we're able to change our perspective of anger, and we say, this, whatever I'm feeling angry with right now, it's not forever. Like this quarantine, it's not going to be forever. It might seem like it, but it's not going to be forever. It's a season in life. This feeling of really, really missing my loved one who passed away, and just the overwhelming sadness. It's not forever. Like how it talked about the emotions pile on each other. Mm-hmm. And I could go back to it, but feeling one part of anger, irritation, and then indignation, then wrath and rage. When we let our emotions pile on each other, recognizing, all right, I'm heading to a place that I don't want to be. So I need to recognize that, and now I need to reel it back in, changing our perspective on maybe the way we want to be perceived, or the way we want to love others, and how we want to be an example that Christ wants us to be for one another. That's a helpful way we can also manage our anger.
I made a conscious choice that rather than rant in my home with my beautiful wife and my beautiful son, I'd get down on the floor and I'd build Legos. But the outcome of spending time with him on the floor building Legos would be far more beneficial to his life, my life, and our family life, or our tribe, as we call us. It's just an enormous blessing right now to be able to recognize that, because I am one prone to anger at injustice. And this feels very much like an injustice, doesn't it? Feels like something was cast upon us that, man, that there's no guilty people in our country over this, right? I mean, this isn't something that we can say, well, you know, they did that. No, but this is just an indiscriminate disease, like many other diseases, that just is having an effect on the country. And so that sense of injustice, but recognizing that early on, you know, rather than ranting and raving, and rather than walking more, biking more, but absolutely down on that floor doing Legos with that little boy. That just, like Jessica says, it changes my entire perspective. And checking the news and not watching the news is probably the biggest change of my adventure that I have gone through this journey.
Thanks for being with us. We are so happy that you spent your time with us. We're happy to walk through. This is our last kind of emotion we're covering, and then we're moving on to forgiveness next week. I am also looking forward to that lesson. Thanks, Ray, for all of your wisdom, and everyone for all of your input. Always appreciated. Let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for tonight. Thank you for teaching us the examples of righteous anger and unrighteous anger. Thank you for the emotions that you have given to us and the ways that we are able to manage them because of your example. We thank you for each person that has joined us and each person watching online. And I just pray that you continue to help us manage our emotions as we walk through our grief. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Lord bless you guys.
All right. Yes. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for being here.